How's it going, Diablo fans? So I made a tier list for all the changes which are going to be on the PTR. And this is only for Sorceress, so if you don't want to like go through all the patch notes or watch like 15 million videos where everybody is basically saying the same, you can just check this one here on my website. The link is in the description down below, and this is all going to be tiered, so you can choose the tier here at the top. So you can, for example, only show like the God tier changes here, or you can show only the S tier, or you can show all of them. I basically tiered them based on how much impact they're gonna have on the sorceress, not on how good they are. So if there's like something which has a very high impact, for example, I think I have it in S tier, like Asus Ferocity here, right? Asus Ferocity is basically getting bug fixed, which is a pretty heavy nerf. So I have this as an S tier because it has like a very high impact, but it's actually a pretty strong nerf. So don't confuse the tier with the strengths, okay? All right, let's start going through these items. So first, we're going to start with the new unique items. So we're going to have two new unique items for Sorceress. One is going to be God tier, and one is going to be probably garbage, but I still list it as B tier. So let's start with the Fractured Winter Glass. So this is going to be the cookie cutter item, and I'm going to actually make another video tomorrow on this item where I showcase how this will affect the Frozen Orb Conjuration build. So what does this do? So it says casting a Frozen Orb has 50% chance to spawn a random Conjuration, and then it says like a hit, Conjurations have 100% chance to launch a Frozen Orb. I don't think these are gonna self-synergize with another. If they would, that would be absolutely crazy, but I don't think that will. But still, this is extremely strong, right? So we can play a Frozen Orb build now because there's other Frozen Orb changes we're gonna get later too. And basically 50%, so every second Frozen Orb you launch is gonna spawn a Conjuration. That together with Conjuration Mastery, as showcased here, which also has been buffed, gives you 6% damage per active Conjuration. So basically every second Frozen Orb you launch gives you 6% extra damage for, I think it's like 10 seconds or something like that. This is insane. Playing this together with Hydra and other stuff is gonna give you like tremendous damage. But again, I don't want to like talk too much about this right now. I'm just gonna list the item here. It is a very strong item, also has very good base stats, vulnerable damage, non-fizz damage, cooldown reduction, and Conjuration Mastery is awesome base stats for unique. So the second new unique is going to be Flame Weaver. We don't know the stats, we just know the unique effect, which is casting firebolts through your firewall causes it to split into 4 bolts, each dealing 80 to 100% more damage. I don't think this is going to be significant. It might be, but I don't think the fire bolt damage is going to be any good even by doubling it. This is just the new item. So let's move on with the item updates. So we have two important item updates here. We have the Staff of Liam Neeson. This is pretty cool stuff for charge bolt builds. I actually have like charge bolt builds, which was pretty popular in season 2. So what it does is we replace damage to close enemies with ranks of charge bolts. So this basically gives us a significant damage boost. We don't know how many ranks it is. I just wrote 3 to 4 now. Maybe it's gonna be more, who knows. But it's definitely a boost to this item. It definitely becomes more viable. And then second of all, T-Bolt's Will. T-Bolt's Will is gonna get nerfed, so the 20 to 40% increased damage is gonna get nerfed down to 10 to 20%, and the Unstoppable only lasts for 1 second after. So let's just face it, it's pretty useless now. Maybe, you know, about the resource generation and the maximum resource, it might give you a little bit of a benefit, but I think T-Boss Will is pretty much going to fall off, and it's going to get replaced by defensive items, at least for the higher tier contents. This might still be viable in Hell Tides and low tier contents, but I don't think it has a spot in high tier contents at all. Let's move on. We have new legendary aspects, and we have 2 of those. So I don't really think these are gonna be great. I list them as B and C tier here. We have the Flamethrowers aspect, which basically will split Incinerate into 3 beams, which are doing a little bit less damage. I don't really know if these are going to be great. We don't really know what stats are going to be variable here. Maybe, you know, we could get more beams if it's on the amulet, or maybe we get more damage if it's on the amulet. We don't know at this point. But it's just giving Incinerate more AoE, which is not a bad thing. Maybe Incinerate will be able to do the damage it needs to. We don't know for sure yet. So right now I'm just treating this more as like a fun build item with a B tier. And then we have the aspect of Tino's Destruction. This gives you 25 to 40% increased damage while you have no defensive skills on your action bar. I don't think this is going to be played at all. I'm also writing it here in the comment. We have a lot of aspects in the 30 to 35% damage range, and usually we don't have enough slots for even putting all of our damage aspects on our gear. So I feel like this is a pretty significant downside for just like, make it 5 to 10% extra damage depending on the aspects you're playing. So I don't think this is going to be very impactful, so I'm giving it a C tier for now. Let's go to the legendary aspect updates. So this is a big section here, right? We have a lot of updates and most of them are going to be significant for Sorceress. So first of all, we have Aspect of Disobedience. Aspect of Disobedience used to give you like these stacks, and every stack used to fall off individually. So you would basically have to be spamming skills like crazy to keep the maximum bonus up. Now they changed it, so they no longer fall off independently, which basically means you just have to do like one attack every couple of seconds to keep all your disobedience stacks up. And this is a very, very good update for Disobedience. Right now, if you really want to play defensive, you can just play Juggernaut's Aspect, and this is going to give you the armor cap for a Nightmare Dungeon tier 100. But remember, we're going to get the Pit, which is going up to monster level 250, so we might need Juggernaut's Aspect plus Aspect of Disobedience both, and these are going to synergize very well with each other. Then we have the new aspect of Bounding Conduit. Okay, it gave 15 to 30% movement speed. This actually has been moved to Teleport's core. And the new is Teleport's cooldown is reduced by 1 to 2.5 seconds. After teleporting, Crackling Energy hits 2 additional enemies. As a bonus, we are most likely not going to use this at all. But Teleport's cooldown is reduced by 1.0 to 2.5 seconds. This is actually pretty significant. So if we play Teleport right now, we get a cooldown of around 4.2 seconds without playing Oculus. With Oculus, we can actually get below 4 seconds. And if we take into account that in the new seasons, we're going to have access to more cooldown reduction from gear, we probably will be able to get our teleport down to like 1 second or even maybe a little bit less with this. And this is actually quite a big deal because there's another aspect buffing teleport damage, but we're gonna get to that later. So this might just give you like almost permanent teleport without even wasting an enchantment slot for teleport enchantment here. Then next one, Aspect of the Frozen Orbit. This has already been pretty strong, right? This gives Frozen Orb explosion additional damage. It has been 30 to 40%. This is going to be buffed to 45 to 60%. So this is a pretty significant buff. Even taking into account that we have this wonderful Fractured Winter Glass here, which gives us a lot of frozen orbs from conjurations and more synergy. This is a pretty significant buff here. Then we have the Snow God's Aspect. If you're playing Blizzard, it gives you damage reduction. It used to be 10 to 25, now it's 15 to 30, so it's a 5% extra damage reduction for free. And if we can believe what Blizzard says, damage reduction is gonna become very important in the upcoming patch. Then we have the aspect of concentration. I assume this is going to be changed to a defensive aspect. This has been a resource aspect before, giving some useless mana regeneration. And now it says it gives you 15 to 25% damage reduction after casting a conjuration skill. So I assume this is going to be a defensive aspect now. This is another good damage reduction aspect. If we need it, we might use it. Then we have the aspect of splintering energy. This used to give you like a 50% chance or 40% chance to cast an additional lightning spear if you cast a lightning spear. So they completely changed this and actually made it useful. Now it basically always casts an additional lightning spear, and it increases your damage with lightning skills by 10 to 25%. I would assume this is multiplicative. So if you're playing a lightning build, you might, playing lightning spear regardless. And this might be a pretty significant buff for you if you're playing a lightning build. If you're not playing a lightning build, this is probably not going to be significant. Maybe it's going to be important if you're playing like a very, very high cooldown reduction conjuration build to get conjuration mastery stacked as high as possible. Then let's move over to the B tier. We have like the Shattered Aspect here. So since Asus Ferocity is not working on all damage anymore, like Frost builds will need to choose a new key passive. So if we choose Shatter as a key passive, we can now actually use the buffed Shattered Aspect, which gives us 30 to 45% more Shatter Explosion damage, and enemies no longer need to die while frozen. Shattered Aspect before basically was useless because mobs needed to die while frozen. Now it's working by just buffing the shatter damage here. I think that's a very good change. Then we have the aspect of Inner Calm. This used to buff your damage by up to 40% for every second you were standing still, but it used to stack up every second, and it had a 40% maximum, so this was basically a boss killer build. Now it has 5 to 10% base damage, and after standing still for 3 seconds, you're gonna get 30%. So I can just see this is like a pretty significant nerf to aspect of Inner Calm. I don't really see anything useful of this version. If you want to put it on to just get 5 to 10% increased damage, there's like way more offensive aspects we can use for that. Then we have aspect of Abundant Energy. Crackling Energy hits additional target. This is useless. D tier, I'm not even going to talk about it. Aspect of Singed Extremities. I don't know, Immobilized Stun wears off. This is not doing anything, D tier. And then we have the aspect of Conflagration, which gives Incinerate and Explode once every 3 seconds, I guess. So I don't think this is going to be a thing. I don't think Incinerate is going to be a thing. And if we are going to have Incinerate, we're going to have 3 beams anyway. So I don't think the explosion here is going to matter all that much. Even the explosion will also just burn and not do like impact damage as it looks here. I think this is not going to be of any impact whatsoever. Let's continue with the skill updates. So we have the most important stuff here. As you can see, like this is all God tier and S tier here. So really skill updates, we got a lot. And the most important one here is general buffs to Conjuration and minions. So it says Necromancer, Barbarian, Druid, and Sorcerer companions now receive 100% of the player's attributes. What this basically means is before they only used to get 30% of your crit, 30% of your attack speed, and 30% of your lucky hit. Now they get 100%. So what it just means is your conjurations have 70% more attack speed, 70% more crit, 70% more lucky hit. This is just insane. Conjurations are going to be king. They are going to be extremely strong. They already have been doing a decent amount of damage with the last buffs from the last updates. Now they're going to be like totally over the roof. Like I cannot express how awesome conjurations are going to be. I cannot wait for Tuesday to try it out myself. Then we have buffs to Frozen Orb. I'm also labeling these as God tier. So we have a 20% damage buff on Frozen Orb. Then we have we had Enhanced Frozen Orb, which used to do 45% additional damage against elites and 30% additional against all other enemies. And while cast above 40 mana. Well, now it says while healthy, it does 45 increased damage regardless. So damage against non-elites is a stat you can pretty much ignore. Like nobody cares. Only importance is against elites. So we basically have 15% more explosion damage of Frozen Orb against the elites right there. That is a pretty significant buff. Then we have Greater Frozen Orb, vulnerable chance from 30 to 40%, nice buff. And duration increased for the vulnerable from 2 to 3 seconds. That's also a nice buff. And then, I don't even know what this is. Fixed an issue where Frozen Orbs fired from enchantment effect did not prioritize targeting enemies on screen. So that was the Frozen Orb enchantment, which would be just like, you know, throwing Frozen Orbs off screen instead of like hitting the mob in front of you. So I really hope this is going to target the closest mob now. That would be awesome. And the most obvious, I forgot, travel distance is now controllable. So Frozen Orb is going to shoot where your cursor is. So really, Frozen Orb is going to be an entirely new build. And we have been waiting for this forever. Frozen Orb was an iconic build in Diablo 2, and now it's going to be even more iconic in Diablo 3, and I can't wait to play this myself. Then let's go over to even more God tier changes. So we have Hydra. So Hydra, we can just, you know, cast 2 and not 1 now. So this is like an awesome change. Given the fact that conjurations will have crit, attack speed, and damage from this skill here above, we can just cast an additional Hydra, which gives us a chance to have like 3 Hydras up with the Serpentine aspect, 4 to 5 Hydras with Hydra enchantment. So this is really gonna be a significant buff to Hydra and Conjurations overall. Then one more god tier change, Devouring Blaze. So Devouring Blaze gives 7% damage against burning enemies, and if they're also crowd controlled, it's 10%. This used to be immobilized before, and immobilized you didn't really had access to immobilized other than playing pure fire builds, because fire would be able to immobilize. So now it's crowd controlled, right? So it does the maximum damage now against chilled, frozen, stunned, and everything. So this is a tremendous buff for Devouring Blaze, which works with every single build. Then last god tier change, Conjuration Mastery. It used to be just 1% damage per active conjurations, and if you're playing a conjuration build, this actually can stack up to like 20 or 30 times. So if you have 6 points in Conjuration Mastery, this would be able to give you like 180% damage or more. Now, on top of it, we get movement speed and mana regeneration for each active conjuration, which is just a pretty significant buff here again. Moving over to the next, this is an S tier, Asus Ferocity. This is actually a nerf, but again, I'm tiering this by their impact and not if they're good or bad. So Asus Ferocity is not a nerf, actually it's a bug fix. Asus Ferocity was applying its critical strike damage and damage to all damage types and not just fire, and this is now properly fixed and it will only work for fire damage, which means that, you know, lightning builds and frost builds are most likely not going to use Asus Ferocity anymore. This leads us to a little problem that, you know, frost builds don't have strong key passives. Well, for Frozen Orb, I guess we can still use Avalanche, but, you know, Blizzard, for example, doesn't have a strong key passive. You could use Shatter, but Shatter does really only work in very high tier content. So we're kind of missing a key passive now on frost builds, which is kind of a big deal. That's why I'm labeling it as S tier now with a very high impact. So then we have S tier, the changes to teleport. I already talked about it a little bit. So we have enhanced teleport, which used to give us cooldown reduction based on enemies hit, which is pretty useless. Well, now it's giving us free 30% movement speed, an awesome change, especially in the early game. Then we have the mystical teleport. Before it used to, you know, make the crackling energy hit 2 additional enemies, which was nice with overflowing energy builds. But now it does actually give us 500% increased damage on teleport, plus 3 free crackling energies. So just think about this real quick, 500% increased damage. With the aspect of Bounding Conduit, we can get the teleport cooldown down to like a second or even lower. And now it does 500% increased damage. Teleport's damage isn't bad. So we take Raiment of the Infinite, teleport, and the aspect of Bounding Conduit. And we will have a pretty significant damaging ability here. It might be even possible to play a teleport damaging only build. I don't know if that's going to work, but basically 500% damage, that's going to be the highest impact damage skill in the book for Sorceress. It's probably going to hit like somewhere in the like 20 to 50 millions or something like that if we have good gear. So this might actually be an interesting choice. Also given the fact that this might also work for teleport enchantment. Then we have another S tier change here, Ice Armor. So Ice Armor has been changed. We get more mana regeneration. Doesn't really matter at all. But for Shimmering Ice Armor, before it was pretty useless. Literally was not doing anything. Well, now we reduce the cooldown for Ice Armor by 2 seconds for every 50 mana spent. So basically that means we have infinite Ice Armor as long as we have any kind of mana spending ability, right? Or mana spending build. And then the Mystical Ice Armor, it used to give us more barrier generation. Now it actually periodically chills enemies and it gives us 15% increased damage to frozen enemies. So if we play a frost build, this gives us basically 15% free damage right there on Ice Armor, which is an awesome change. Then let's move over to like some more changes here. So the core skill tags have been updated. So basically what it means is mastery skills are all considered core skills now. This is actually significant. For example, Ball Lightning can now directly trigger accelerating aspect. Elemental Dominance has been buffed from 3 to 4%. This is basically 3% extra damage. So this is nothing major, but you know, it's free damage, right? Then we have Greater Charge Bolt, damage increased by a little bit, with the buff of the stuff of Liam Neeson here, which gives us levels to Charge Bolts now. Charge Bolt builds might become a little bit more attractive with this extra 10% damage here. And then let's move over to the B tier. So we have Frigid Breeze. Frigid Breeze used to work for all damage type. It only works for cold now as expected. I'm listing this as a B tier. It was relatively good to get extra mana regeneration in the early game with fire builds and stuff like that. In the late game, I think you don't really need the mana regeneration from Frigid Breeze in other builds than cold builds. So that's why it's just B tier. Then we have Shimmering Frost Nova. It used to generate 4% mana per hit. Now it gives dodge chance, and dodges generate 20 mana. I think it's good in the early game. If you're like struggling for mana, you can get a little bit of mana regeneration, but I don't think it like does anything in the late game at all. Then we have Flame Shield changes. This probably mainly affects hardcore players. Before it used to give 20% movement speed, now it gives 50% larger burn radius. I don't really know. I don't care at all. I probably like the 25% movement speed more. And then now the 25 mana cost reduction, which was pretty useless, now gets changed to, well, after the Flame Shield expires, everything around you gets stunned for 3 seconds, and your next skill is a guaranteed critical strike. I don't think this critical strike story matters at all. You're gonna have way more than enough crit on sorcerers anyway. But, you know, stunning mobs after Flame Shield falls off is, you know, pretty much a nice to have. Then we have Supreme Deep Freeze. Deep Freeze now applies vulnerable. Alright, it's nothing major, but it's still a little bit of a buff. Elemental Attunement, which resets your cooldown, had a lucky hit chance of 5%, now has a lucky hit chance of 7%. I don't think it's going to be a major difference, because this was basically it can only happen once every 10 seconds, which is basically the limiting factor on this, not the 5% lucky hit chance. Then we have Mana Shield. We get 8% instead of 7%. You know, it's 3% more damage reduction, which is a tiny buff. So, you know, we take it. And then we have changes to Ice Shards. Ice Shards do like significantly more damage, we have to say. So 28% more damage and 10% more damage on Enhanced Ice Shards. But still, I don't think Ice Shards is going to be a great build to play, with having Frozen Orb as the alternative being way better here. Then we have the Flame Shield enchantment. This is most likely going to matter for hardcore players. In softcore, you're probably never going to play this. For hardcore players, you know, this used to be a cheat death. Now it activates after losing 100% maximum life accumulated. Then we have Shocking Impact. Damage doubled once again. So again, this is nothing for late game, but it does a little bit of damage when your Lightning Spear stun stuff. So this might be good for Helltide farming and other stuff. Lightning Spear, we have an 8% damage buff. Feels pretty irrelevant if you ask me. Incinerate gets a little bit more damage, and it gets 15% baseline damage reduction by channeling. You know, if high tier content does a crazy amount of damage and there really will be an Incinerate build, this is probably a nice buff, but I doubt that there will be an Incinerate build. So let's come to the like meaningless stuff. Frost Nova enchantment goes up from 30 to 35%. This doesn't really matter at all. Frost Bolt enchantment goes up from 15 to 18% chill. Doesn't really matter at all. And Convulsions basically stuns enemies with lightning skills. The chance goes up from 3 to 5%. It stays irrelevant. If you play lightning, your lightning spears are going to stun everything regardless. So this is pretty much useless. So let's move over to Paragon board updates. So we have quite some important bug fixes here. Now, I never had really confirmation that Tactician Glyph, Winter Glyph, or Torch Glyphs were not working as expected. Apparently, they were not working as expected, and their damage bonuses were additive. So now they are going to be fixed, which is pretty nice, because Tactician Glyph is very, very important, since it buffs rare nodes, and buffing rare nodes is really a very, very good thing to do on your Paragon board in general. So Tactician Glyphs now last 4 seconds longer for every defensive skill you do not have on your action bar. So I guess in most builds it will be like 4 to 8 seconds more duration, which basically says, you know, it's going to be active permanently. And, you know, the damage should now multiplicative instead of additive. Then we have Winter Glyph. Winter Glyph does significantly more damage now, buffed from 15 to 18%. It used to be additive, and now it's correctly, as displayed, multiplicative. And then Torch Glyph, same story. Well, Torch Glyph just buffs burning damage, so since there's no real burning build, I think it doesn't really matter at all. But, you know, Torch Glyph should also now be fixed instead of additive, doing multiplicative damage. Then we have Elixirs. Not much to say about Elixirs. You know, Elixirs get a little bit changed, but we have one thing I want to note here is the Elixir of Resource. So if you like have a build which is resource hungry and you don't want to fix resources on your gear, Paragon, or wherever you want to fix it, if you have enough Elixirs of Resource, Elixir of Resource 2, resource cost reduced 30%, maximum resource increase 25. So resource cost reduced by 30% is awesome. This is pretty much going to fix all resource problems right there. But you have to farm this Elixir in Helltide, so, you know, I don't know how impactful it's going to be. We have to try it out. If there's builds which are really so mana hungry, which I don't really think, since we get a lot of resource cost reduction on our gear now with the greater affixes, I don't think this is going to be a thing, but it might be, especially if you're like in the leveling phase doing Helltides, this might be like very, very important, since, you know, in the early levels, you don't have perfect resource generation, so it might actually help a lot. Well, then we have Elixir of Momentum, basically giving you 3% movement speed after each kill, stacking up to 15 times, so this stacks up to 45% movement speed. This is, again, probably for early game, if you're like farming Helltides or whatever, and you have a 45% extra movement speed, you know, you're going to be killing everything, you're going to be rolling. And then we have Elixir of Holy Bolts. Well, it will do Holy Bolts after killing an enemy. We don't know how much damage it is, so this is probably pretty much meaningless at this point. And then last but not least, I just have some more miscellaneous stuff here, which I don't really care about. I'm not even going to go through, and you can read them if you want. But this is basically just bug fixes, which I don't think they really affect anything at all. There's like one change here for controller, that you can teleport with controllers and control like the distance you are teleporting. But other than that, these are like all pretty meaningless. Yeah, and that is my like tier list basically on Sorceress changes. I have compiled everything for you. Check the link in the description down below. You can check it yourself. Again, you can filter by the tier if you want, or you can just read through everything. I'm really excited for the Season 2 PTR, and I will have a video on this Fractured Winterglass Frozen Orb Conjuration Mastery build coming up very soon. This is just my patch notes review, so if you really don't care about all the other classes, you just need the patch notes for Sorceress, you can check these. Everything is in here. All the other patch notes with the itemization and everything, I'm pretty sure you have already seen it 15 times. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I see you latest on Tuesday live on the PTR. Take care.